Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is the Code of Conduct with the King podcast. I am your host, JSpenceTheKing. And my man Richard Rush said he was ready for them bongo drums with the countdown, and I am too. It is Monday, June 14th. Good grief, we're halfway through the year. Man, it feels like the season just ended, but I got a very, very special guest, and I am excited tonight. I feel like I'm gonna have a good football discussion. So this is what I live for here tonight, man. I have the current beat reporter for, and you know what? I'm gonna ask him real quick. Let's stop this music real quick. Let's get him in because I know I'm gonna say it wrong. This intro's. There we go. Had to get that off there. Got my man Mike Rodak. Before I'm gonna introduce you the right way, but first, is it al.com or is it Alabama? Because I know I'm reading it wrong.
al.com.
al.com.
I've
so
heard
we have
ways, so feel free.
Okay. Well, we have the current beat reporter for Alabama for al.com, yeah. And we have the previous beat reporter for ESPN for the Buffalo Bills and once upon a time the New England Patriots, Mr. Mike Rodak. How's it going today, sir?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me on, man.
Man, I truly appreciate this. This is a treat for me. Like I told you before we came on, I'm not one of the Bills fans who has any animosity towards you. So this is a treat for me. This is a good deal. So
fine either way.
Yeah. So let's get right into it, man. One of the first things that I try to ask everybody who comes on the show, who has a history with the Bills or even just has a history with the league and kind of knows how the team has been viewed. So you left prior to like this new regime kind of like really becoming a real thing. Looking back, what would you say is the biggest difference between like just obviously they're winning now, but aside from the winning, like what's the biggest difference when you look at the teams from then when you were covering them as opposed to now?
I think competence would be probably the word to start if you wanted to sum it up in one word, but they're competent, which I think I think Doug Whaley's a smart guy. I think Rex Ryan's an intelligent person. Like they've all made it to high levels in the NFL, but to actually put it all together and to have a cohesive plan and to kind of know what you're doing, but also get people to do what you want to do, that's tough to do when you're talking about, 53 to 90 players in a roster and all these coaches and people in the building. And they never were able to do it before then. But I think having these guys in Buffalo now, they're not just good at football, but they're good at managing a business, really, and managing people. So they're competent in that ways, and they're able to kind of get everybody on the same page. They know what they want out of their team. They have a vision for the future, and they're kind of able to bring people together and to win games. So they've proven that. And that's certainly a great place to start, but I do think there's a lot of NFL teams that are capable of doing that. And that was always the biggest knock against the Bills was that out of the NFL, I mean, you're talking 32 teams, there's probably 15 to 20, 25 teams that have it figured out. And there was probably 5 to 10 that were just perennially just messed up. And the Bills were in that category for quite some time. But the odds were against it lasting as long as it did. And I think finally they found somebody who can kind of bring them up into that main category of teams that know what they're doing. Maybe don't win every year, maybe don't make the playoffs every year, but you're kind of at least able to show that you're competent, that you're capable of being at that level in the NFL. So I think that's the biggest quality that they have that's gotten them from point A to point B.
Man, the consistency is off the charts. Like it's completely different. And like as a fan looking back on those times, it was like every summer, obviously, as a fan, you want it to be positive. And you're like, man, we can't keep being bad this long. So like you kind of just feel like law of averages will play into your favor. And it just did not, like at all. So with that being said, though, like, so for you, covering the team and knowing people who cover teams and doing all that stuff, as a member of the media, was it difficult to cover the team? And I mean, like, because the reason why I asked this, obviously, I alluded to the fact, like, sometimes, obviously, Bills fans aren't the most kind, but then aside from that, aside from the fans too, sometimes when the culture isn't winning or when the building isn't happy, it's a tough place to show up to, even if it's just for a couple hours to interview players or to, so was it a tough task for you coming to Buffalo?
I mean, it depends. Like, I don't know if it was consistent because I was there for 6 years. And you're talking Doug Marone starting off with, and then all the way through Rex, and then Sean's first 2 years. So I guess it's hard to group every year together. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly some days where you could just, there was so much negative energy in the building, and sometimes they blame it on you. But I think at the end of the day, like, a lot of the times it was just because they were losing and things weren't going well. And walking into that building can be tough sometimes, just knowing that you're going to have to ask some questions, and you're going to have to walk into the locker room after a loss, or, the Monday after a loss back at the facility, and going to have to ask questions about things that went wrong, or, the season in general, or whatever. And you kind of know that you're going to have to take it a little bit, but at the end of the day, that's your job to ask those questions. So, was it tough in that aspect? Yes. But at the end of the day, in this job, you kind of have to treat every game, every week, every season the same. Because you're not, and that's the biggest thing I think some people maybe forget as fans, is that you're not going with the roller coaster with the team. That's
right.
Your job not to do that. And so if the team's losing, if the team's winning, you kind of got to cover it all the same way and approach it the same way. So, you got to stay above the fray, I think is probably the best way to put it. And again, is that tough? Is it hard? I mean, some days I think it's difficult just for a composure standpoint. You get to stand in front of somebody and ask them, why did you screw up? But it's something you have to do.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, and I know you answered it properly, but I just want to clarify, I wasn't necessarily asking about fans, because
right.
That is what it is in itself. But for instance, for me, I won't mention names of the company, but when I was in Buffalo, there was a specific company I worked for that just wasn't the best environment for me as a person. And it wasn't anything against like the people, but it just wasn't the right fit. And I say that because it was a culture that didn't breed happiness. So for me, going somewhere as a happy person in a place that wasn't happy, it just didn't work. So that's kind of where I was drawing the question. But so now let's fast forward. You went down to Alabama, and that is completely different. Like, first, aside from leaving Buffalo, which at the time wasn't a winning franchise, to go into Alabama, who was like basically one of three franchises that win in college, or one of two technically, depending on how you want to look at it. What's your experience like there? Like, what, in comparison, a direct comparison, like what can you say was the major difference going to Alabama?
I mean, it was kind of a tale of two seasons. So I've covered them for 2 full seasons now. This will be my third coming up. The first one was 2019, which was pre-COVID. Last year, obviously, was post-COVID or during COVID. And it was totally different experiences covering the team. I mean, I'd say from the time everything shut down last March until now, I've been in Tuscaloosa, and I live in Birmingham, which is about an hour away. I've been in Tuscaloosa maybe 5 times. So to cover a school that's based in Tuscaloosa and plays games in Tuscaloosa and practices, to not be there is a little bit weird, because everything was on Zoom. All your press conferences, even if you covered a game in person, and I covered a couple games in person, but they only allowed, 1-2 people from your outlet at the actual game. It's still on Zoom. We're not allowed to watch any practice all season long last year. So you feel like you're so far away from it last year.
Yeah.
But the first year I was there, you're much more immersed. You're able to cover practice. You're sitting and it's definitely different with Saban than any NFL coach I've covered. I mean, it's just the way it's set up. It feels like a classroom, because they have it's a college at the end of the day. So there's desks, and you're sitting at your desk, and then Nick Saban walks in, and he's 10 feet away from you, and you're asking a question sitting down. It's just a little bit different feeling than an NFL coach. And it's much more selective. They're much more controlling with who asks questions. And it's all, they have their own rules. It's not the NFL where there's NFL rules that control everything. Alabama makes its own rules. Nick Saban makes his own rules.
Okay.
So it's different. You can't talk to freshmen, whereas in the NFL, like, you can talk to any rookie you want. You can talk to any player you want. All that's mandated. There's not that sort of rule in college. So you kind of have to adapt to that. That was, I think, the biggest change for me is there's no open locker room. You can't walk into a locker room after a game and walk up to any player you want. I mean, they choose 3 or 4 guys, and believe me, they're not choosing the guy who screwed up. So
Right.
you're only going to be able to have quotes and talk to somebody who, in their mind, did something good during the game. So it's a very controlled environment. You kind of have to work around that, and there's pros and cons to that. But I enjoy it. It's definitely it's a different atmosphere, as I think, as passionate as Buffalo is, and it's certainly, I think everybody can agree, like, Buffalo is one of the better stadium atmospheres in the NFL. College football is still different, bands and students, and it's just a different environment. And Alabama's, up there in terms of good places to watch a game too.
Let me ask you this, because you were here when Rex was here in Buffalo, and everybody seems to love Rex. Like, anybody around Rex loves Rex. Is Nick Saban as cool as I think he is? Like, on TV, obviously sometimes it's like you catch him after a bad half or something goes wrong and he's not cool at all. But then, like, every other time, he just seems like the cool dude that all the players would really love to be around. Is he really that cool?
I think you see it from afar. I mean, I don't think we see it personally. I don't think he interacts that way with us. I mean, there's a couple reporters out there who he knows really well and he's known for a long time, and he might be a little bit more chummy with them. And I'm certainly not one of them. I haven't covered them nearly long enough to do that. But you'll see some videos. I mean, he has a lake house in Georgia where he brings all of his players. I think he just did it a couple weeks ago. And, they go out tubing on the lake, and there's definitely a different side of him. But again, he doesn't really show it with us. I mean, he's just an intense guy. So he has a radio show that he does weekly, again, pre-COVID, so 2 years ago. It's in a restaurant in Tuscaloosa, and there's all sorts of fans there, and they have like a weekly media guest. And so I was the guest later in the year. I think it was right after they lost to LSU 2 years ago. And, I'm sitting less than a foot away from him. I mean, we're squeezed into this little table in the front of this restaurant. I don't think his legs stopped shaking the entire time. Like, this guy is just wired differently. And he's going to be 70 years old this year, but he is just constant thinking about winning and thinking about the next thing he has to do and just blocking everything else out. There's like an anxiety there with him, but it's like a good anxiety where I think has made him productive and made him successful. And it's really interesting I was feeling it because his leg was a foot away from him, and you can just feel the energy and the tension with him, and a desire to win. It's just really interesting to be around. I'll put it that way.
Well, that's intense. And so, I mean, you actually led me perfectly into a question that I wanted to ask, because prior to coming on here, I DM'd Bruce and Joe Miller and like, hey guys, anything that you kind of feel like I should ask Mike too? And Bruce wanted to know, like, and obviously we want to be careful with how I ask the question, but as far as for you, preparation, and it is the same question I asked, but now it's very specific. What's the difference for you preparing and working, covering a good team versus a not good team? Now, before it was just like, the difference in Buffalo to college, but I mean, like, okay, the Bills weren't good. We could be honest about it. They just weren't good.
Right.
Alabama is great, and they've consistently been great. There was a huge difference in that. Preparation wise, and for you, what's different about that?
It's a good question. I would have to think about it. I think there's so many storylines in Buffalo that kind of wrote themselves. Like in my first year, my first training camp, Kevin Cobb slipping on the rubber mat at St. John's Fisher, running between practice fields, and he hurt his knee. And I mean, and not to belittle these people, but like Cyrus Quandra running naked over a fence. I mean, there's just so many stories. You're just like, man, that's so bizarre. Like, you just can't even, if you were a movie writer, you can't make up some of these scripts. And obviously, you feel for some of the people in the situations, but it was just like, it was.
I don't remember that. I'm sorry. Who jumped over and who was naked? Jumped over?
Cyrus Quandra.
I don't remember.
Coincidentally, their second round pick in 2014, and I think it was on the 400 coming out of Aurora back to Buffalo, and he was running naked or without pants, I think was the way they phrased it in the police report, and jumped over an electric fence. And it was just stuff like, man, like, again, you couldn't make it up. And I half of the examples aren't even coming to my mind, but like, there's some random days where I think about it, I'm like, man, like, that's a weird story. But there hasn't really been that at Alabama. It's just about winning, and you're trying to figure out how do you like restate something that's obvious? Like, all right, Alabama was, I think, 15-0, 14-0 last year. They had a perfect season, and they won. I think it was an average of 35 points a game. Every game was almost the same, with very few exceptions. It's like, all right, well, what do you write about a team that week in and week out, Mac Jones was throwing for 400, 500 yards. Devontae Smith had 3 touchdowns. Like, it was the same story every week. Now, it was the same story every week in Buffalo, but there was kind of a different twist.
Different.
Right. No, it's
so I guess that's kind of what I'm asking, because it's like with a good team, you're absolutely right. Like with a bad team, the stories write themselves. And like you said, it's like, you know, all this happened. Oh, he dropped this. He did that. He did that. But with Alabama, you're right. Like Mac Jones threw for 4 touchdowns again. Oh, Najee Harris ran over 5 guys and hurdled another. Same thing. So it's like, how difficult is it for you as a journalist, as a writer?
Right. Well, you almost feel the weight of history because, like, for instance, Ohio State, Alabama, the national championship this past year, that was Nick Saban's 7th national championship, which is the most all time, and that set the record. And like, we're the Birmingham News, we're AOL.com, but we're the Birmingham News. We're the paper of record in Alabama. And this football team that's been around for 100 plus years, and you just had a coach that did something that's never been done in college football before. And you feel like you need to write about it in a way that 50 years from now, somebody's going to be reading your story and saying, you know, here's what happened that day. Which I don't know if somebody's going to be reading a story about a game that happened for the 2015 Bills in December. You know, they lose to the Cowboys or beat the Cowboys. I don't even remember. I remember that Cowboys game at the end of that year. But I'll remember like Alabama, Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, even Alabama, Ole Miss this past year. Like, that's part of the perfect season. That's part of history. Like, you feel the burden of capturing it the right way. I mean, Devontae Smith and all the records he set, Najee Harris and the records he set, you're just trying to keep up with it, but you're trying to write it in a way that's good work, you know?
It's just tough. It's just tough because I mean, like right now, it's still like, even for me, and I'm nowhere near like a journalist. I'm not on your level, anybody's level, but like creating content during this time of the year. What
I was going to say, not necessarily the highest rung of society. There's certainly people who have more meaningful jobs than we do as journalists, especially sports journalists. But
you know what, though, the thing about that, and then I'll get back, like, because I'll transition back to the question. But the thing about that is, I'm starting to look at life completely different. And one of the things that I'm looking at is like just pure happiness. So, like, in terms of importance, like, is it more important to me really to make the kind of money that, like, for instance, Josh Allen is going to start making soon? Or is it important to me to really be happy genuinely every single day? And I don't know how much you love Alabama, but like for me, I grew up a Bills fan. So like, if I could ever like really just cover the Bills every day, all day, that's a dream for me. So that's what I mean when I say, like, I'm not on your level. This is your job. I'm doing this for fun. Well, Buffalo Rumblings is awesome, but you know, I'm not working for, you know, Buffalo News or anything. But back to the question, I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's important that people understand, like, you know, what these guys do is important, but everybody sees it differently. The reason why I'm trying to be Mike, and the reason why I'm trying to be Marcel and whoever else that I've had on here recently, is because I just absolutely love this. And I love the Bills. I love what these guys do. So I'm appreciative for you coming on, man. Like, I really look up to you for what you do. Honest to God.
You got it. Thank you.
Joe, and he's speaking for the fans right now, because I know you can't quite see the chat. There's a ton of people asking a very, very candid question, man. I don't know if I want to ask it, but I'm gonna ask it.
All right.
Are you a Patriots fan?
I mean, I grew up as one. Everybody, I think, knows that, being in New England. But I think once you start working in the business, and this will be year 11 for me now, 11 or 12, I'd have to go and count. But like, once you start working in it, and just as you were mentioning a few seconds ago, like, once you're a journalist and it becomes your job, and you see the other side of how the NFL works and how college football works in this case, you're not a fan anymore. And that's all that kind of gets shut off. So the way I kind of put it to people a lot is, whether it's the Patriots or Bills or Seattle Mariners or Minnesota Timberwolves or Arizona Coyotes, like, it's a job, and you have to approach it the same way. And I mean, I got a lot of obviously Bills fans coming after me about the Patriots when I was in Buffalo. Believe me, I also got Patriots fans coming after me about the Bills. I remember writing a story when
Really?
when the Bills let Stephon Gilmore walk to the Patriots, and the Patriots signed him, and then the Bills basically took that money and they went out and they drafted Tre'Davious White, and then they signed Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And they remade that secondary, which was really the strength of that team when they made the playoffs in 2017. I wrote a story saying it was a good move that the Bills let Gilmore walk, and the Bills did what they did. Well, 6 months later, Patriots fans are all over my mention saying Gilmore just led the Patriots, the Super Bowl or whatever. I'd have to double check the year, but Gilmore was Defensive Player of the Year and all that. And Patriots fans essentially saying, well, obviously the Bills made the wrong decision in letting him walk. So I got it on both ends. And then, of course, down here, some of the emails, like they make our emails public on our website, which is not the case at ESPN. So I got a lot more fan mail. And down here, it's Alabama and Auburn. And so I get Auburn fans coming after me about things I write about Nick Saban. I get Alabama fans coming after me about things I write about Alabama. And again, it's kind of staying above the fray is what you have to do as a journalist. And whether I'm covering Alabama or whether I'm, let's say, our Auburn guys on vacation and I cover Auburn next week, like you got to approach the job the same way.
Man, you're so good at this because you're making this easy for me. You mentioned New England, Auburn, all this stuff. Dude, is Cam gonna be Cam, or is Mac Jones stepping in this place? Because we got an Auburn guy and an Alabama guy now fighting for this position. And even though Cam is calling them mac and cheese and they friends and he got nicknames and stuff, Cam is he's a guy who wants to be the guy. How do you see New England playing out? We can kind of get into the AFC East now and kind of transition there.
Yeah. So I guess to preface, like, I had limited amount of watching of both Bills and Patriots games last year. I mean, I watched some of the primetime games. I would say if it was like a regular 1 o'clock CBS game, it's regional. More often than not, we got the Dolphins down here because of Tua. So we didn't really get too many Patriots games and didn't really get too many Bills games. So I can't say that I watched more than a few for each live. I mean, I obviously follow them a little bit, on Twitter and all that, but so I don't have like a wide depth of knowledge on how, what Cam did every single game last year, but it wasn't just from talking to my cousin back in Boston. It certainly wasn't anything to write home about with him.
It wasn't pretty, man. Wasn't
pretty.
Yeah,
but it seems like just from reading with, what Patriots writers have written that I follow still, and it seems like the Patriots are still really high on him as an organization, and Belichick seems to be really high on him. But how much that actually pans out by September, we'll have to see. I would right now I would expect Cam to start week 1, but how long that lasts is anybody's guess. I mean, I was always impressed with Mac at Alabama. He was certainly on our radar here a lot earlier than he was the national radar, because this was the backup who kind of came in when Tua was hurt. But it's still a transition for him. I think he still has qualities that may or may not translate to the NFL in 2021, meaning like, is he the right style of quarterback to be the modern NFL quarterback, the modern NFL starter? I don't know. But I think obviously the Patriots, given the investment that they've made in him, he's going to be starting at some point. It's anybody's guess when. But I think the Patriots, in a perfect world, in their minds, would probably want to start Cam as long as they can, at least this year.
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you. I'm not a huge college football fan, but I know enough about Mac now, especially he's been drafted into our division. From what I've seen and from what I've, now obviously in college, I always felt like college and the NFL were different, not because it's two different leagues, but because I feel like the speed of the game is different. The talent level is different. So, of course, I'm not going to say anything negative about him. I thought he put up numbers that made you say, whoa, this kid should be drafted. But do you really think, and I feel like you're kind of alluding to it, do you think that he fits the mold for what an NFL quarterback is now? I don't see that.
He doesn't. No, he doesn't fit what I think you would want if you were to take a pen and paper and draw one up, and what you would want in 2021. I think that's what Trey Lance might be. That's what Lawrence might be. It's what Zach Wilson might be. And that's the reason why those guys got drafted higher. I think Mac fits the mold of maybe a quarterback 10 or 15, 20 years ago. And that's, to the Patriots' credit, that's kind of what they've been running under Brady, and that's the style of quarterback that they've been successful with. And whether that translates going forward, past success doesn't always translate to future results. So we'll have to see on that. But that's their offense. I think he fits their offense. I think he fits what they're trying to do. The question is, can he do it to the level that Brady did? And that's obviously an extremely high bar.
Yeah.
But if you can do it to a 70, 75, 80% level and, be a Matt Ryan or Eli Manning when Eli Manning was really on his game, like, can he be that sort of quarterback and get them to where they need to be? I think he's certainly capable of doing that. But who knows where it actually plays out. And that's kind of the fun part with watching some of these guys, is you just don't really know. But he's accurate. I mean, I think his best qualities are just moving around in the pocket, going left to right, sensing the pressure, sliding up in the pocket. He didn't get sacked a lot at Alabama. I thought he really managed the offense. This is the other thing, too. You heard a lot in the pre-draft process about he has Devontae Smith, he has this offensive line, he has Najee Harris, he has Jalen Waddle. But the problem was, so they have this 5-star freshman last year, sophomore this year at Alabama from California, Bryce Young, quarterback, and they would bring him into games when they were up by 2 or 3 touchdowns in the second half. Well, the offense didn't run nearly as well, nearly as efficiently when Bryce Young was in the game as compared to Mac Jones. And I think that if you can't take those variables away where, okay, you can't really see Mac without everybody around him, well, how about everybody around him with a different quarterback and kind of look at it from that view? And we saw that last year at Alabama, and it wasn't pretty, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of delays of game and sacks, and I don't know how many drives total there were with Bryce Young, but I think maybe they scored 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns at most, compared to Mac, where it was like 3/4 of the time they were scoring a touchdown when they touched the ball. And I think that's a credit to him. Obviously, there's a lot of help that he had in the field, but I think just that fact right there proves that at least he was worth something out there.
Well, in his defense for this part of it, I'll take his side, because I actually hate that argument when people take the other side and it's like, well, yeah, look at who he's throwing it to. First of all, so as a Bills fan, look at Josh Allen's rookie year. Now, granted, he wasn't the most accurate guy as it is, like coming out of college. But the thing is, when you have receivers who are dropping balls, when you have tight ends who aren't catching at all, people can't create separation. It's very difficult. Now, 3 years later, he has Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley. And now people are like, well, yeah, he's going to do that. He has Stephon Diggs. But you can't have it both ways. Like, if you're upset that he sucked when he didn't have it and now he's better. And so same thing with Mac is what I'm saying. Like in college, look, the kid went out there and the young man went out there and performed well, and he got drafted. I guess I just don't see him as being, like the question asked, I don't see him being an NFL ready quarterback. But I don't think Cam, and I'm a fan, first of all, it hurts me that he's in New England. Like, it hurts my heart. It hurts my soul that he's in New England, because I'm a huge Cam fan. I actually have both jerseys, the Patriots jerseys, which shouldn't happen. But I don't think he's there either. Like, I don't think his shoulder is what it used to be. I don't, I've seen plays now where I saw a practice, some film from today, where he was like just throwing it, no defense, just air.
Right.
And it just did not look, he had like 2 ducks in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw the same video. It was not pretty. And it's been interesting too, just as a complete aside, just watching the New England media. And I know everybody, talks about Rodak, the guy from New England, but just being kind of outside of that for a little while now. Like, I haven't worked there for 8 years now. It's funny to watch, like, mini camp in June and all the ups and downs of, all right, Mac's going to start. Oh no, Mac's terrible now. Mac's going to start. And they're analyzing every single thing that happens at practice. And like, I've been there. I've covered the NFL, obviously. Like, I understand the 24/7, 365 nature of it. But when you kind of step away and watch from afar, some of the coverage that it gets this time of year, it's a little bit crazy. Even Cam's injury, last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. And
a hand injury. Yeah.
Right. The very detailed diagnosis of what happened with his hand. And again, that's our job. I understand, we're journalists. It's just, it's breathless, I think, is probably the word that I would use with some of that. And even down here, like Alabama, that's all there is. Like, there's no pro sports down here. People don't care about the NFL. Obviously, hockey doesn't matter. People care about baseball a little bit, but it's all about college football. But even in June, I don't know if we'd have some of the discussions that we would have about, who's going to start 3 months from now. But that's part of the business, and that's part of content and just talking about things, and just how it works, I guess.
I think it's a little more tough with the NFL too, though, because obviously these guys are getting paid so much to play.
Mm-hmm.
So like the stories that come along with just their contracts alone and the expectations.
Right.
So I think it's there, because you're right. Like when his hand was injured, it's like they wrote like a play-by-play from the finger, his pinky finger hit the it was just like, oh, you covered every single part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just don't see them. I don't see them. I think right now where they are, I think they have a phenomenal team. I think they built a team they paid for a team this offseason that honestly, if they had a quarterback, I would be nervous. But because of the fact that it's Mac Jones or Cam Newton right now, I don't see it happening. Let's transition again to the guy who started before Mac Jones down there in Alabama. Tua's in Miami, man. And last year, some of his teammates weren't impressed with him. There were all these anonymous quotes and people saying stuff. I tend to think that, guys come in as a rookie and that's not necessarily who they end up as. So I don't want to, kick him out the league already. Right. How do you see Tua? I know you mentioned you get to see him a little bit more often as well down there. How do you see him developing going into this year?
Yeah, I don't think I would give up on him quite yet. I think I even saw something today where his record was 6-3 or 7-3 as a starter last year.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. I mean, by rookie quarterback standards, it wasn't all that bad. It was probably middle of the road statistically. And again, we've all watched like EJ Manuel as a rookie in Buffalo. Like, it was a lot better than that. It was a lot better than a lot of rookie seasons that we've seen. So I think he's certainly got a chance. It's just there's weird there's things about Tua that are unorthodox. I mean, he's a lefty, he's shorter, he has the injury history. That's a big thing too, where it seemed like he was hampered a little bit by I think it was his ankle towards the end of last year. I think he had a thumb at some point too. And this is a guy who just had multiple hand injuries at Alabama, multiple ankle injuries, and then finally had that hip injury and just couldn't stay on the field. So that's, I think, going to be the biggest thing with him is like, can he stay in one piece? Can he stay healthy in the NFL? And I think that's still very much a question that's up in the air. And if he can't, then it's probably not going to work out for him. But I think he can overcome, again, some of those non-traditional quarterback qualities that he might have just because he's so accurate. And that's, I remember talking to Brian Daboll even when Daboll just started at Buffalo, and we were talking about Alabama before I left. And obviously Daboll had come from Alabama. He had coached Tua for a year, and he's talking about, putting a soda can up on the goalpost or whatever, and Tua would sling it and nail it. Just that good of a quarterback and peripheral vision where Daboll would hold up numbers, on the outside of the field, and Tua could read them. So he's got some skills. I think, there's probably just that he's a 5-star quarterback from Hawaii. Like, the road was always kind of paved with gold for him. There's always these expectations with him, and his family's very close to, at Alabama, they were always around. You'd see him in the facility. There's just, I think, there's a lot of pressure that comes with being Tua. And I think there's probably an element where he just has to kind of be himself and just do his own thing a little bit. I haven't been up close with him in Miami to really say like how he is around his teammates. I think from my 1 year of covering him at Alabama, I think his teammates liked him. But he's got that sort of laid back quality to him where, Mac's a little bit different. I think Mac's intense. Mac's like nice, but I think Mac's a really tough competitor. And when he's out in the field, like, he really wants to go out and beat you. I think Tua's in some ways the same, but you heard that coming in the pre-draft process with him with Tua. I think people compared him to Marcus Mariota and maybe a little bit too relaxed, too laid back. Again, I haven't been up close with him in Miami to really know, but I think if it would go wrong with him, that's might contribute to it a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you're a good quarterback, you're a good quarterback. And I think
whether you're a nice guy or not.
Just look at Aaron Rodgers. I mean, there's obviously issues with that personality and the way things are going in Green Bay, but he's a good quarterback, and when he's out in the field, it doesn't really matter what sort of guy he might be behind the scenes.
The only thing about the Tua situation that I dislike, as far as like his teammates and stuff, like the anonymous quotes, like put your name on it. You know, like if we're in this locker room together and you're less than impressed with what I'm doing, fine, come talk to me. Tell me like, yo, step it up, bro, or whatever, like whatever the conversations are. But to go and talk to journalists and say, hey, keep my name out of it, but this is how we feel. I just think I think it's soft. And I guess I'm a Bills fan though, you know, and I'm talking about Miami players. I'm like, it's soft. They talking about their quarterback. But that's the part about it I don't like. But I think Miami, similar to New England, I think they have a heck of a roster, man. I think their coach is very good. I love Brian Flores. I think he's solid. And if the ownership down there is smart, they'll keep him down there for a while. And I think he can build something. But again, are we ready to believe in Tua, or should Miami be ready to believe in Tua?
Yeah, I think they sort of have to for now. And it was weird too this offseason because it seemed like they were flirting with not believing in him, and they were talking about Deshaun Watson or trading the pick to Houston, whatever the case may be. It was probably a little bit soon on that. The investment that they made in Tua last year just to give up that quickly. But things move quickly in the NFL. With that said, I haven't really been one to really criticize teams too much for hedging their bets at quarterback a little bit, but they got to give him at least one more year, just given what he did as a rookie. I think was acceptable. I think that was at baseline pretty decent for a rookie. But he's got to take a big step forward this year. It's not like they have Fitz still where they can kind of do this seesaw, whatever you want to call it, playing one and then the other. Like it's probably going to be two out there and sink or swim at this point.
As much as I love Fitzy, and every Bills fan probably still feels the same about Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I hated the fact that they were like, basically they made Tua a yo-yo. Like they put him in, took him out, put him in, took him out. It's like, come on, man. Like you drafted this guy where you drafted him. You like put him in there. If you feel like Ryan Fitzpatrick gives you the best chance to win the football game, start Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like, and maybe I'm like old school in that mentality, but I just feel like you have a game plan and you go into the game with your game plan and you work that game plan.
Right.
I don't understand because it's a completely different offense when Fitz is in there. So like everything changes, and I just did not understand it. And actually, one of my friends, I was in fantasy football trying to make a trade, and I actually have Tua, and he was saying like, well, I would take Tua, but I think they're probably going to do the same thing this year because they got Jacoby Brissett. And I'm like, well, no, that's not happening with Brissett. But the fact that it happened, it makes people nervous about Tua. And it's like, no, Tua's the starter this year for sure.
Right. Well, it's weird too with Fitz because like nothing against Fitz, but that's sort of what happens with him. Like no matter where he goes, whether it's the Jets or Washington now, I'm sure it will happen to some degree. It happened with the Dolphins. It happened to 15 other teams that he's played for. Like he comes in there and he's good enough where you kind of want to start him for a few more games and see what happens. And he has these great games and you're thinking about making the playoffs. And then there's that typical Fitz game where everything kind of falls apart and he throws 4 picks and everything just sort of comes crashing down. And it just happens year in, year out. And at the end of the day, it probably sets back those teams because they're not putting their young quarterback on the field, that they kind of have that crutch with Fitz where they want to use him. And he's probably one of the better backups in the league still. And it's like Nick Foles even, it's at the end of the day, I don't know if starting, and obviously there's injury aspects there with the Eagles, but like having Nick Foles, does that help Carson Wentz in the long term? Does that hurt him? It's a nice backup plan to have, but if you're having to go to your backup plan at quarterback, that means your plan A isn't really working, and that's what's going to get people fired at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I just I don't know. I think it's wrong to do, and not even in the sense of like hurting people's feelings or anything like that. Like these are grown men. I don't care about the feelings, but if to be a winner, I just think that consistency matters. Mm-hmm. So the absolute smallest level of that, all the way to the highest level of that, I think that you have to be consistent. And when you can't be consistent if you're switching your offense like in the game. So I just that was a deal to me, but. lastly, about the AFC East. So now the Jets got a new quarterback too. They traded Sam Darnold out, which I think is a good thing for him. I think he'll do better in Carolina. I really do. But the Jets got a new quarterback as well. They got a new coach. How do you see the direction that the Jets are going in? Do you think this is they finally might be turning the corner here, or do you still kind of think it's more of the same old Jets that we've been seeing?
That's what I thought. What year was it? They all kind of blend in now. It was the end. It was when Darnold had a couple good games against the Bills. There was a one in Orchard Park towards the end of, I think it was my last year, 2018, where did he beat the Bills? I forget. But he had a really good game. You're like, man, like maybe he's pulling it together. And no, it just didn't. It didn't come together the way that maybe I thought it would have for the Jets. And that's obviously been a story for a lot of different coaches and GMs there for a while. As far as Zach Wilson, like, I'll be honest, I have not watched him. And as much as like I'm trying to learn college football, like you mentioned before, like you're not a big college football guy. I'm not either. I didn't grow up as one. But obviously down here, it's religion. It's everybody's lifeblood. So I tried to get into it. And there was a few games, if you remember last year, everything got screwed up with college football where the SEC didn't start until the end of September. Right. But BYU kind of had to make their schedule on the fly, and they were playing games like Labor Day weekend. And so there was a lot of Zach Wilson games on, this first couple weeks of September. And there was part of me, I was like, man, I should really like get to learn college football and be a diehard and sit on my couch and watch BYU, whoever, Coastal Carolina, whatever it was, that was towards the end of the year, but whoever BYU played in September. And I just couldn't do it. I'll admit that I just couldn't do it. So I really haven't watched Zach Wilson, but I'm interested to see him. I'm sure he's going to start at some point, and it seems like the Jets are just trying whatever sticks. I don't know if it'll work for him, but it seems like maybe they're better than last year, and that's progress on their end. But I don't know if we're talking about them as contenders in the AFC East by any means.
No, I don't think that they're and this isn't Bills hate. This is just honest to God truth. I don't think that they made enough changes to improve, and they have several holes. And that, like, it wasn't just the quarterback; it was a lot. And you just can't do that with one draft, and you can't do that with one class of free agents. You actually have to build. And I think if this coach is good, which I think he is, I think it's going to take them 2 or 3 years to kind of start getting in those conversations as being some type of real contenders.
Right. And I've covered some bad Jets games too. I'll mention that. I remember covering the fumble game against the Patriots.
You were there.
I was there, and then 2 years later, I was in Detroit for that rescheduled Bills Jets game after the snowstorm. And I want to say that the Bills annihilated them in that game.
Wasn't that like a color rush game too, or something like that? I feel like
well, that might have been the next year. But there's some, even the Bills, like even in their bad years, they seem to play really well against the AFC East.
Besides the Patriots,
so basically the Dolphins and the Jets, they had a really good record against them. And there's some games where they just killed the Jets. I don't know what it is. I just watched a lot of bad Jets football over the years, and I don't know if that's really going to change.
Let me ask you this, man, because now that you said that, you covered the butt fumble. You were here when we had guys butt naked jumping over fences. You covered like the Kevin Cobb, the knee injury, slipping on the mat.
Yeah.
What has been like the wildest coverage? Like what's your wildest story in memory from either the Bills, Patriots, or even now in Alabama? Like, because that you have to have like a wild set.
Like I mentioned, it's funny because like I have this list in my head, but like I forget half of it like on the fly. I'll just be in the shower randomly and remember some story that I covered, and like, man, that was kind of weird. Like I said before, man, I again off the top of my head, it's probably one of those that I mentioned earlier, but probably something with Marone or Rex. I mean, Rex and the Trump rally, Rex jumping out of an airplane.
I forgot about Rex and the Trump rally, man. Rex was everywhere.
He was.
Rex was everywhere, man. Literally everywhere.
Yeah.
The bike with his brother.
Right. That was a fun, weird couple of years with that. And again, I'll get off this tonight. I'll remember 6 other stories that trump that, no pun intended, but I wish I had something on top of my head right now.
Well, I'll have to follow up on you with that one day, and I have to tweet it out. Like, well, no, this is what his favorite one was.
Yeah.
So we just went through the AFC East quarterbacks, except for our guy. So when you left, Josh was like coming in, like he was coming in basically.
Yep.
So his rookie year, when we drafted him, I was not a fan. I wanted Lamar Jackson based on the team that we had. Like we had Tyrod, so in my mind, I thought he was like a better version, like a younger, better version of what Tyrod was. So I didn't want to change anything. I'm glad I was wrong. But so this is a two-part question. One, were you kind of like me where you felt like the Bills really don't need another raw talent? Like they need somebody who can come in and start winning some games. A, and then B, are you as amazed as the rest of the world is? Because it's like, I think Mel Kiper Jr. is the only one that can really say like, no, I had this guy as my number one guy. You all were wrong. Like, how do you feel about him now?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start with the first part. Like, I always, like with Josh specifically, I really tried to like stay away from making any declarative statements about him when he was coming out. I remember my reaction story, whatever you want to call it, was just, the Bills fans at the draft party kind of expecting Josh Rosen instead, and getting the other Josh. And that was certainly true at the time. I think a lot of people wanted Josh Rosen, instead of Josh Allen. But I don't think I ever really said one way or the other, like, is he going to be good? I think that I certainly said there's potential there. And so in that sense, am I surprised? Actually, no, because I think the potential is always there. Like, I think if you draft the Josh Allen, you're hoping that it turns out and you hit the lottery and he becomes everything that you wanted him to be, that everything that you think he's capable of being, which given his height, size, arm strength, like that's the raw ingredients are there. So I'm not surprised in that sense. And I honestly, like with him, in terms of taking a safe route or whatever, like I was always a little bit maybe more down on Tyrod than other people were, just because I didn't think they were going anywhere with him. Even that 2017 year where they made the playoffs, like just didn't really see it. And people killed Sean for the Peterman game, and maybe rightfully so, given where they were in the season.
I don't think it was rightfully so. No, I don't think it was rightfully so. When you have the game that Tyrod had the week before, you deserve to be benched. And I'm a Tyrod guy. Like I love Tyrod. That was a horrible game.
Right. I guess that's where I was going with it. Like, I think you had to try something different with him. Now, with a winning record, wherever they were, maybe one game over 500, I forget. Was that the exact game where you're supposed to make that decision? That can be debated, but I think trying something different at quarterback was what they had to do. And again, it's one of those things where like people forget sometimes, but a lot of people like Tyrod Taylor here, meaning Buffalo. A lot of people like EJ Manuel his first year. And I mean, I remember the Bills website had a comparison between EJ Manuel's first X games and Cam Newton's first X games, and the stats were similar. I think they're trying to make the argument that they were the same. And obviously it didn't work out. Like EJ went one direction, Cam went the other direction with his career. But people at that time thought that EJ was going to be something, and they came after me for maybe saying he wasn't going to be. Same thing with Tyrod. But I always thought that they should have taken a swing at quarterback, and I think that ended up being the right swing to take. I think they made the right moves to move up in the draft with that kind of intermediate trade they made with the Bengals, and then going up a step further. So, yeah, it certainly worked out for him.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I was mad at you about the EJ take, because I liked EJ. I was mad at you about that, but only because, well, and that's the thing. Like he was is a super good guy, and it was easy to fall in love with, And but then even outside of that, I don't think that he played. He wasn't Cam, but he also wasn't a lot of other guys that we made comparisons to. But the thing is, I do feel like he had a positive trajectory prior to his knee injury. And I think that Doug Marrone completely ruined him. And I watched I think it was the Eric Wood podcast last summer, and EJ was on there, and EJ was talking about how, when Marrone benched him, it basically like ruined all his confidence. And like, he almost didn't even want to play football anymore. He wanted to quit, and he had so many different things going on. So it was like for me when I started to see those takes, and it was like, no, man, y'all ruined my guy EJ. So I have to admit I was kind of mad at you with that one, but
it
no,
kind of goes back. Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of goes back to like what we were saying at the very beginning, where if you want to be successful as a team, you kind of have to have everybody on the same page. I think at that point in Doug Marone's tenure, yeah, he was probably looking out for EJ a little bit. I think he had told people at the time that if he didn't bench EJ when he did, that EJ would have been done, which he ended up being done anyway, but he would have been really done if he had waited even longer. But at the same, Doug, I think, was trying to worry about Doug for a little while there, and that was in the middle of the Bills ownership change and everything that went along with that. And that 2014 season was a wild ride. And obviously everything, I mean, there's maybe your story of things that I've covered, your coach quitting on New Year's Eve at 8:00. That might be up there with top 5 moments, but like Doug was worried about his own career and kind of his own deal. And you don't get everybody kind of rowing the same boat. So,
well, that's smart.
Yeah,
that's smart.
Right. And that's the NFL, and it will eat you alive, and it's hard to blame people for it. But at the end of the day, I mean, here Doug Marone is back with me in Alabama. So
yeah,
the offensive line coach on here. So
how is that, man? Like
I haven't again, because we haven't been with practice or anything.
So the interactions are
okay. Yeah, but I look forward to seeing him next time. He was always nice too. Like we saw him when he was the Jaguars coach, and then he would be at the owners' meetings, where the Bills had their table for breakfast, and then the Jaguars had their table with the media. I remember one time Doug getting his plate of food and coming over and saying hi to all of us, and it's business, to these guys too. Like it's not just with the team that's on the front of your shirt. So that's Doug. But again, I'm happy to see him down here soon.
All right. Well, man, we're rounding out this hour here, and so again, I want to thank you for doing this with me, man, because this has been fun for me. Like it's been good football talk. It hasn't been all geared towards the Bills, and it's been some college here, some other teams. So this has been fun for me. Before I let you go, I was trying to scroll through the comments here to see if there were any exact questions for you that we could ask. That would be good. I see more just comments more so than questions. So I'll let everybody hey guys, we got about 6 minutes where you can shoot Mike a question if you have anything good for him. I'm not putting up anything crazy. So while we're waiting on people to kind of get involved here, I did want to ask you, so aside from the memories of craziness and all that,
yep,
I always also ask, after people leave Buffalo, when you do go back to Buffalo, or if you go back to Buffalo to visit, which wing spot are you going to?
So I'll be there in 3 weeks from Wednesday.
Okay.
In Buffalo for the first time since I left. Partially because of COVID. I couldn't really travel last year, but I'll be there in July. And Elmo's is 100% the spot. And so if you're living in Buffalo, I'm sure one of these nights upcoming in July, you might see me out there. So definitely Elmo's. Bar Bill's great too. I can't say that I ventured to too many other places. I know 911 Tavern, certainly people seem to like. I've been to Duff's. I think Duff's were good, but there's better. Sorry, Duff's, but just the way it is. And it seems like there's different places that kind of pop up and start to get some traction out there too. But I have a hard time going anywhere other than Elmo's. That was the very last night I was in Buffalo. I went there, and I can assure you that the first night I'm back, that I will also be there.
All right. Well, I always ask that because I get different answers, and the reason why I asked it is because it's really the capital of the world, man. Like you can go to 80 different places and not be disappointed, and I just think that's beautiful.
Right. Well, believe me, anytime I tell somebody down here that I moved from Buffalo, it's either what'd you think about the snow or what'd you think about the wings? So it's one of those.
The snow is the bad conversation, and then the wings are like, yeah, well, they got the best wing. I had a moment here wants to know, was Tom Brady close with the players or coaches, or is it like a facade?
I think so. When I was there, it was kind of the middle of his tenure, and I think it was starting to drift away. Like I think early on, he was definitely close with those guys because he was the same age as them or even younger. But I think as he got older, it really became like Tom and then the rest of the team. And that's even going past when I covered them. Like I think the last 5, 6, 7 years that he was there, especially with the receivers. Like they would bring in a young receiver, and just if he didn't like him, then he would just toss them aside, and that was kind of their issue because he was relying on Gronk and Edelman, and literally until both of those guys' wheels fell off, and they just couldn't develop anybody else at that position or those positions. And I would lay some of that blame on Tom. I think if you ask people who are more plugged into New England these days, like they'd probably agree, like, especially when he was late 30s, early 40s. I mean, it's tough for him to associate or to kind of, you know what I mean, like gel with some of those younger guys who come in. And there's just that aura of, here's Tom Brady. I need to make Tom Brady happy. And, yeah, I think there's definitely this part of him just as a celebrity too. I remember being at, it was like a charity bike race he had on Cape Cod, and there's all sorts of kids around, and I think it started pouring rain. So we're all like standing under this tent. It was me, Tom Brady, and a bunch of kids, you know, taking part in this event. And he ended up just bolting out of there and having to run into his car and get away. I think there's this part of that there's a celebrity, like there's a different quality to him.
Develop. The expectations are different. Yeah, you can't, like, he can't just be free like me, because
it's like being the president. You know, you can't be down to earth when everybody's going to swarm you for an autograph, or everybody's going to want to take a picture with you. It's just the downside of where he's at in his career, I guess.
I'll be honest with you, and I got beat up for saying this, man. I got a man crush on him now. Like down there in Tampa, he's like the most fun dude. Like I just love him so much. Last year, his social media stuff, like when they showed him throwing the football with Drew Brees' kids, and after their last time playing each other, and then the jokes that he does on Twitter and Instagram, he's just like an all around. He just seems like a fun dude, and it's just like, man, it sucks that I had to hate him for 17 years.
Yeah, and I think just having kids probably changes that, and that's typical in any walk of life. It's true in my case too, where I think having a kid, as I do now, like changes your perspective on a lot of things, in work and in life in general. So it's probably been a good thing for him, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, now questions are coming in, but the time has run out for us. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them. But what I'll do is I'll shoot you an email at some point later on and see if we can get you back on for another time. And that time can just be a straight Q&A for people, and we can just talk.
I'm down.
But before I let you go, well, yeah, that'd be fun. And actually what I'll do is I know, Matt and Ryan. So I'll try to get we could just do like a fun thing, just get everybody in here. But before I let you go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you? If you got any stories that you just put out, or that any big stories you got coming out
this week. This is luckily the time of the year where it's really slow, and you're just trying to enjoy the slowness of it all. But yeah, it's AL.com. Like I said, it's the Birmingham News. It's the main paper down here, and obviously, you can still find me on Twitter if you so choose, and I'm sure you can find me at Mike Rodak. But I've definitely lost some followers. Not that I pay too close attention to it, but I'm sure that tweeting about Alabama baseball and softball and Nate Oates basketball down here probably isn't.
I love Nate Oates down there. I love him
down
great.
There. Yeah, he's been great. But yeah, I'm sure that it's not the most appealing content for people back in Buffalo.
Okay, well, you know what though? You'll be shocked. There's a lot of Bama fans in Buffalo, which I hadn't. Again, I'm not a college fan, so I'm like, I don't understand where all of these, people are so loyal to these college teams that they never went to. They never, they never even visited. You've never been to Alabama, but you just love but it's a thing. You're right. It's a religion to people.
I think it was my last week in Buffalo. I went to the Public House on the lake, in Hamburg. And standing outside the front door was a couple, both wearing Alabama, gear. When I asked them where they're from, and they're from right outside of Tuscaloosa. I'm like, oh, I'm actually moving down there next week. So you see them everywhere. I mean, they're certainly everywhere. I mean, you see Bills fans everywhere. You see Bills fans down here. I was driving a couple months ago behind a guy with a Bills sticker on his car. There's a Bills backers bar in Birmingham, so kind of goes both ways,
Yeah. Bills Mafia, we try to take over everywhere, but I do think college right now, when I watch it, I do think that the love for college, it does tend to surpass the NFL love that I've seen.
Yeah,
it's just wild. It's different,
right? It's part of it's the alma mater, part of it's just it's tradition, it's state pride. It's all those things kind of coming together. Whereas I think people down here view the NFL as being very corporate and stuffy, and the stadiums, don't have the same atmosphere. Obviously, Buffalo is kind of an exception, I think, for that. But it's true in a lot of other cases, just having been to most NFL stadiums and having been to 5 or 6 SEC stadiums now, like it's definitely different. But I don't know if I like one or the other, above the other.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The man, the one and only Mr. Mike Rodak joined me for the last hour, and I had a ball. Ladies and gentlemen, please go find him. Go check out his work. And I hope a lot of you can forgive him in your heart. You see, he's a great guy to talk to. I enjoyed this hour, and y'all know how I do it over here at the Code of Conduct, man. Y'all can find me every Monday night like this, doing this show here for you live on the YouTube network over here with Buffalo Rumblings. And then the show will be live tomorrow as a podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and all those other places you can find them. Hey, love each other, take care of each other, and live in peace. And as always, stay positive, test negative, go Bills.